Hello, bonjour. Welcome to our conversation today on empowering Canada's workforce for a sustainable future. I'm Gazella Knight and serve as a policy analyst for the Government and Public Affairs team at the Future Skills Center. To walk us through our agenda today, this is a 90-minute webinar, and we'll begin with some framing and introductory content to help shape our discussion. This will be followed up by a presentation on some of the research findings and in-the-field discussion and Q&A, which will address the latest research and success stories from FSC's funded projects. Then we'll be closing with final remarks. To begin, allow us a moment to acknowledge our land. We acknowledge that we're currently on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, also known to some as Toronto. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The treaties that cover these territories include the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. As our work takes place across Turtle Island, we also acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and play on these lands and commit to learning about our shared histories and breathing life into the journey of reconciliation. Thank you for respecting this shared moment. Now, for a little housekeeping, or as I like to say, Zoom keeping, I want to remind everyone that today's session will be recorded and a copy will be available to all who have registered. We also want to hear from you throughout the webinar. Feel free to use the Q&A function to comment and ask questions. Please refrain from using the chat function as we've designed this process to be most efficient using the Q&A function. You will see a Zoom toolbar with this Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our communications team will be monitoring it closely and is eagerly looking forward to doing what they do best, connecting with you. A reminder that this is a bilingual event. To select your preference of English or French, please turn on interpretation button on your Zoom toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. We're excited to bring your attention to a peer learning group we're hosting tomorrow, with the intention of providing an opportunity for you to discuss how our work intersects through common interests, challenges, and resources. The ultimate goal of the peer learning group is to facilitate an open discussion in an informal, safe, and shared space. Again, this is taking place virtually tomorrow, Friday, September 13th at 11 a.m. You can find the registration link in the chat on the events page or on the events page of our website. And to begin this necessary conversation, I'd like to introduce Alex Stevens, Associate Director of Research and Evaluation here at the Future Skills Center. Alex.
Thank you, Rosella. Hello everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue de la part de Santé Compétences Futures. Je suis Alex Stevens, directeur adjoint de recherche et évaluation. My name is Alex Stevens. I'm the Associate Director of Research and Evaluation at Future Skills Center. Just welcoming everybody here. I'm calling you from Ottawa, which is the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe and the people of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, which encompasses the watershed of the Kitchissippi Big River, now commonly known as the Ottawa River. So welcome everyone. What I'm going to do is provide an overview of some research that we've recently released, one of our State of Skills reports on the theme of sustainable jobs, which is what we call all of the work we do and the support at the Future Skills Center related to the net zero transition and sustainable jobs and so forth. So I have about a 20 minutes or so that I'm going to take to go over some of what we found and talk about some of the work that we've supported before turning it over to some of our exceptional partners who've been doing some really great work in this area in different parts of the country. So I'm assuming that everyone, I think we're sharing. I think you can see my, let me just make sure that I'm sharing here. Ellie, am I sharing or no?
Yes, we can see.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Something happened to my presentation. All right, so just a quick, just sort of maybe to set the scene a little bit for the work we do, and probably be going over stuff that most of you know, but always good to start on a common footing here. Pretty clear that now the issue of climate change is affecting us in very direct ways, whether it's flooding in Toronto, hurricanes in PEI, and of course, forest fires across Canada, most recently, particularly in Canada's west and the north, most recently, big fires in Jasper and melting sea ice in the Arctic, of course, as well. So the impacts of climate change are at our doorstep across the country. I think consistent with our acknowledgements about land acknowledgements and reconciliation, and it's worth pointing out as well that Indigenous peoples and the communities that they live in are often on the front line of those impacts and that change, and that's something we keep in mind in terms of the work that we do in this area. Canada is also, it's worth pointing out, and I think we all know that, is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the other part of it as well. We suffer the impacts of a problem that we are partly responsible for causing as well. Now, how are we responding to that as a country? Of course, as you most know, we've got two major goals that are going to shape the pathway that we're going to take to climate change, to addressing climate change and moving to a net zero economy or a decarbonized economy. We need to decarbonize or have a net zero electrical grid by 2035. And the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or net greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050. So that means several things. It means there'll be transitions as economic activity moves away from certain industries towards others. We expect a decline in sectors tied to fossil fuels, but not the disappearance of those sectors across all of the different kinds of decarbonization scenarios our research partners and others have looked at. So when I say decarbonization scenarios, I mean different looks into the future that people have taken to figure out what are the possible ways we will get to a net zero economy, and what does that mean for different economic sectors? What does it do for jobs? And what does it do for other parts of our economy? So, so we see movement away from certain sectors and movement towards certain sectors. So potential or likely decline in certain sectors, but also very rapid and potentially volatile growth in others, like whether it's to build sustainable infrastructure, to look like advanced manufacturing and clean tech, green transportation, renewable energies, and so forth. All of that tied to reaching these goals, as well as other forces in the market, for example, that will start to drive demand for green sectors, green manufacturing, green products, green services, and green energy. What does it mean for jobs? So you might be familiar with this publication by RBC, the Green Collar Jobs, where they estimated that some 3.1 million jobs over the next 10 years would be disrupted by the fact that by our transition, by our movement towards a green economy. And at the same time, it also finds that there will be net job growth as a result of the net zero or the green transition. So there's always the story here is that there's an upside to all of these changes, and there's a downside. And as a future skills center, we're trying to approach both of those sides. So we're seeing how we can support through a skills lens, adapting to the negative disruptive effects of this transition, and then how to help Canadians benefit from or take advantage of the upside of this transition. There's a few of these research reports that we've put out in the last little while with different partners of ours, the Conference Board, Diversity Institute, who are part of our consortium, our main partners in Future Skills Center, Smart Prosperity Institute, and others. And a lot of these reports are taking a look at the future and trying to predict what are going to be future job and skills demand as a result of moving towards a green or a clean economy. And there's a few things that are becoming clear to us, and some things that are still unclear. So these are best attempts with the best available data to sort of project things into the future and to look at what's likely to come in terms of demand for skills and as we move to a decarbonized economy. But of course, it is hard to predict the specific skills needed in the future. Comprehensive data and analysis to inform decision making are still emerging, and the lack of robust forward-looking research hampers efforts to effectively address skills gap, which is partly why we have invested in these kinds of projects, especially to fill some of these gaps, to give us better foresight and give us a better view into the future. Better, but not perfect, of course. So these are some of the projects that you can look at. They're available on our website. Some of the highlights from that is a lot of these projects are looking at, or these research initiatives are looking at scenario planning, looking at into 2035 and into 2050. And we do see significant changes in the job market with varying impacts across different sectors. With, in some cases, the largest, in some of the research looking at the largest job gains to be expected are in manufacturing, construction, and the transportation sector, which make up about 20% of jobs in our economy. Sectors like carbon capture are expected to experience significant job growth by 2050. We expect to see a decline in fossil fuel and resource sectors in terms of economic activity and in terms of jobs. And of course, a number of other pressures on the labor market driven by increasing demand for sustainable agriculture, advanced manufacturing, green transportation, clean energy, and so forth. So all of this implies significant demands on our labor market and our skills development system to enable workers to move to greener occupations, to balance job losses in traditional sectors, resource sectors, with the growth in new and sustainable ones. So that's kind of this is sort of the research that we've undertaken, and it is worth pointing out that even under these very sort of big disruptive scenarios, a lot of the change that we're seeing is going to be not going to necessarily affect every single job in the economy. Some of the research that our partners have done shows that foresees that about some 75% of jobs in the economy are not directly affected by these decarbonization scenarios. A lot of them concentrated in retail, in finance, healthcare, education, and some other services. So moving into, we want to talk a little bit about the kind of work that we're supporting at the Future Skills Center. Part of it is, as you've seen, we've commissioned or funded some very talented and expert partners on doing research, and we're also investing in innovation projects as well, where we are able to work with partners who have ideas to address some of the known issues around adapting to a decarbonized economy. So what are we doing? So you'll hear about some of that today. We're working on place-based, sector-specific workforce skills development approach. We recognize and we know that the shift to net zero is going to have very, very different impacts across different types of communities across the countries. And so we're interested in models where we can facilitate collaboration between local actors to develop local skills development strategies to tackle challenges, whether they're positive or negative. So that's one area of work, and you'll be hearing from my colleague Hem in a little bit about that. We're working with other organizations on developing new occupational and competency frameworks to begin to integrate and help employers and policymakers and others understand how jobs are going to be transformed by green skills, or what the green component or skills profile of jobs looks like now and how it's going to evolve in the future. And then finally, working on other projects where we help transition mid-career and other types of workers between sectors. So one of the key pieces of work that we're doing, not just in the green area, but across other areas as well, is to look at economic disruption or big structural shifts in the economy that threaten to displace workers, and think about what those workers need to be able to shift from a job loss, decline in one sector that they're working with towards another where the prospects are better, and how can we get them there? How can we help them make that transition as smooth as possible for them? So that can be, so we've got numerous projects. Investing in career development and guidance innovation, working on how to improve labor market information systems, testing a variety of different approaches to reskilling and upskilling workers, looking at the benefits or the effects of providing wraparound supports as part of skills interventions or skills programs to transition workers, and a number of other different things. And under all of this, of course, we are concerned with questions of equity and inclusion. We know that when there's big disruptions, it's not just related to the green transition. It's related to any time that there's a big disruption. We know that certain groups in the population, usually underrepresented or marginalized groups, equity-seeking groups, are often more negatively impacted by downturns or negative disruptions in the economy, and also aren't able to capture the benefits of big upturns in the economy or the growth of opportunity in jobs and sectors. So all of the work that we do keeps that kind of these ideas about needing to look at equity and inclusion, whatever you happen to be working on. So let me just give you a couple of examples. I'm sort of almost halfway through my presentation here, so I wanted to turn a little bit to some specifics. You are going to be hearing some about 3 super interesting projects that we have supported, and I am going to just provide a few more examples of the work that we're investing in, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So in a project that we were working with called Edge Up, which was led by Calgary Economic Development. Some of you may know the organization, and also counted on other partners such as Bow Valley College. The project tried to look at how to address the needs of workers who were being let go when there was a big downturn in the oil and gas sector, and how to smooth their transition into jobs that were equivalent in terms of pay, in terms of the skill level, and how to get them from point A to point B in a way that they didn't have to suffer a long period of employment or decline in income, displacement, and that sort of thing. So Edge Up was launched to help reskill displaced workers from the oil and gas sector and help them transition into emerging technology opportunities across all industries. And it offered participants things like skills training, internship opportunities, support finding employments, and some 300 trainees have received support as a result of that innovation pilot. And we've seen some good results from that. So it's the kind of model that we're looking at, where we look at workers who are about to lose their jobs or who are in the process of losing their jobs, and figuring out what the best combination of supports are for those people to move from one job into another one. And that's important for the green transition. If we're talking about sectors that are going to be declining, where will those workers go? How can we get them into jobs that match their skill levels and career expectations and that kind of thing? Now, this project was looking very closely at a pretty highly skilled, high and relatively well-paid segment of the workforce working in oil and gas. But of course, they're coming from communities that were affected by the big downturns in the oil and gas sector as well. And there's people in those communities who are working in relatively low wage, low skill service industry jobs, who are also impacted by these downturns. So we're working on this segment, but we were also working with another group of people in places like Drayton Valley, where we worked with the team at the University of Alberta, who were piloting a project looking at how could you help people get into jobs, transition into jobs by testing out a zero-fee tuition approach to giving them more training, by letting them go to college and university, by lowering some of the cost barriers to doing that. With Eco Canada, a well-known organization working in the environmental sector, we've supported them to do work on the sustainable blue economy. So everything related to sustainable economic development of ocean resources and coastal resources, where it's an area that we need to catch up in Canada. And the work that we sponsored, and this is sort of the second major area I was talking about, is to look at occupations in this potentially growing sector, and to sort of map the skills needs of those occupations and define the kind of competency frameworks that would help employers and job seekers and educators, helping people to prepare for jobs in that sector. the Canadian Green Building Council, another organization you may have heard of, we're working on, again, transition projects, how to transition workers and sort of in precarious employment positions or in employment who are transitioning out of sectors like retail and hospitality, and how to get them into construction by providing them through some training delivery partners with a set of skills related to low carbon and green building as they transitioned into employment in construction jobs in that sector. The work was for both different types of levels. It was both for operators, laborers, and site supervisors. And in total, 7 courses were updated to include low carbon and green building skills. So it's a kind of work that we've been working on, and we will hear from some of our partners on this. Just maybe to pull out some key learnings from the work that we've supported in this area. Like I said before, for most sectors, decarbonization probably won't have rapid or disruptive effects on jobs. And employment under a low carbon scenario in the future is anticipated to be a net contributor to jobs. So in the long term, the news is good. It's just a question of how do we smooth out transitions so that people thrive as best as possible as we make that transition. Currently, there's only about 2% of jobs that have significant green skills requirements. And if you look at some research that our friends at the Conference Board have done, it is interesting to note that some of these jobs are in the professional service sector rather than other sectors that you might think might be more immediately or currently impacted by the transition to a green economy. So these are administrative officers, corporate sales and business managers, as well as civil and electrical engineers. Some of the key lessons that we're drawing from this. So the first lesson is that things are starting to move. Even they might not be green skills are not necessarily a part of most jobs, but they're probably a part of a minority of jobs at the moment. But that's changing, and we expect that to change quickly. And so there's a case there to do some advanced planning to figure out how do we meet a labor market that needs these kinds of skills. Might or might not surprise you to know that when we look at these sort of future skills projections in different types of occupations and different sectors, that it isn't necessarily green technical related skills that are the ones that are likely to be the most in demand, but in fact, non-technical skills will be as important, if not more important to some of the jobs that we expect to see demand grow for in a decarbonized economy. So technical skills are always important, but we did much of the research that we looked at is finding that there is a lot of an important role for what we call soft skills, for example, so communication, interpersonal, social-emotional skills, things like problem solving. Those are transferable job skills that are important for many of the future scenarios where we're looking at the growth and demand for green skills. I guess the one caution here is maybe that we do find in other types of studies, including studies currently here on the current labor market, that these are often the types of skills that are really in the greatest shortage or in the highest demand. So some of this research may be pointing to a broader deficit in the current labor market that's being captured in these projection scenarios. But nevertheless, it is important to think about these kinds of skills because they're skills that are needed in the current labor market as well, and apparently are in very short supply. So fixing our current problems with respect to these kinds of skills shortages also helps us to prepare for the future challenges of transitioning to a green economy. And lastly, I guess very quickly, I'll say that we have projects that have been looking at what the current level of integration of climate change and sustainability and educational programs is in post-secondary institutions in Canada, colleges, universities, polytechnics, CEGEPs, and so forth. And aside from the obvious programs, such as environmental sciences, for example, what we are seeing is that there might be a need to accelerate the process of integrating green skills and green thinking into curricula and program for those future workers who will be transitioning into the labor market in the next few years, and and into a growing labor market that's increasingly looking for people with green skills and ready to work in green sectors. So our work with Academy for Sustainable Innovation and the Business Higher Education Roundtable is looking at has been looked at this issue and does find that there is an increase in this kind of climate-related programming in universities and colleges across Canada, but there are few unified standards to support such programs. The process of updating courses and programs can be slow and maybe too slow, according to some, to respond to the rapid change that we're expecting. But there may be opportunities as well to work with capacity building with faculty and in particular student leaders in thinking about the next generation of curricula that will be needed and programs that will be needed. So I think I'll probably leave it there with a last couple of words. Why does all of this matter? I'll let you read that what's up on the screen. I will make a few comments on top of what you see there already. Like I said, it is hard to predict the specific skills that are needed in the future. We're still working on the data and analysis that we need to better inform decision making about emerging skills demands for the net zero economy. And certainly some of this lack of enough forward-looking research does hamper our efforts to effectively address skills gaps and prepare workers for new roles, and to ensure that education and training programs are responsive to the needs of a low-carbon economy. But as we've seen, in some of these programs, solving current skills shortages or current areas or types of current skill sets that are currently in very, very high demand, or for which there aren't enough workers who come with the right profile. Working on solutions now to these current problems is also working on solutions to future problems. And I guess at the last thing I will say, for those of you who are getting to know a little bit, who might be sort of new to this area and are thinking about these kinds of skills, is that there's a very important difference between what we call green skills and those skills that we need to get to a decarbonized economy. I think there's a tendency for people to think those are the same, but they're really not. Green skills are those skill sets that are specific to certain climate change, conservation, environmental areas related to renewable energy and clean tech and so forth. And then there's a lot of skills in the economy that we are going to very much be needing and to be able to achieve the net zero transition, which aren't really particularly green. So we will need construction workers. There'll be increased demand for construction workers as we try to build out our electricity distribution infrastructure across Canada. That'll put a lot of pressure on skilled tradespeople and construction workers who don't necessarily need green skills to do those jobs. And some of those jobs they will. But so the growth in the demand for skills isn't just for green skills to be able to do the net zero transition. It's a transition that requires many other different types of skills as well. And we expect those to be in high demand as well. So we're going to hear from some of our partners now. We've got 3 different projects that we'll be talking to. We've got our partners at the Smart Prosperity Institute at the Université de Montréal and at Oceanwise Conservation. I think I will at this point we'll be turning it over to my colleague Laura, who is going to be facilitating the session. I hope I got that right, Laura. Is it you that I'm turning it over to, or Ghazal?
It's me for just a second, because I just wanted to thank you just for sharing your critical work and, for the feeling of hope that it's inspired despite the significant disruptions within our transition to a net zero economy. So just a reminder, if you'd like to ask any questions following Alex's presentation, just a reminder to please do so using the Q&A function. And now I'd like to invite Laura McDonough, Associate Director of Knowledge Mobilization and Insights from the Future Skills Center, to introduce and moderate today's panel.
Thank you so much. Thrilled to be here today. We're going to hear from projects that are seeking to address, those skills-based challenges that climate change presents us, that Alex so eloquently summarized for us. transitioning sectors to lower emissions, sustainable practices, things like mass timber, plant protein, zero emission vehicles, responses that require the development of some new skills. But there's also going to be some sectors that are going to require learning and integration of traditional practices, knowledge from Indigenous peoples, so that we can adopt more widely sustainable ways of existing on this planet. And so I'm thrilled today to be able to introduce a couple different speakers. The first, Hem Dolakia is a senior researcher at Prosperity Institute. Samantha Renshaw, who's the science lead in Fisheries and Seafood Initiative at Oceanwise Conservation Association. Oliver Sonnentag, the associate professor at the University of Montreal. And Camilla F. Gray, who is joining us as liaison from Inuvialuit. And so I'll ask you each to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work, and then we can jump into some discussion questions. So I'm going to pass it to Hem first.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here, and I just wanted to thank the Future Skills Center for having me. I'm a senior research associate at the Smart Prosperity Institute. Smart Prosperity is Canada's largest policy think tank and global research network, and we are focused on the environment and the economy. And we are based at the University of Ottawa. Given that Canada is moving towards its net zero transition, as Alex was sharing, we do expect to see that there will be an increase in the number of jobs across different sectors, whether it's construction, manufacturing, zero emissions vehicles, and so on. So over the past 18 months, we partnered with the Future Skills Center to actually unpack how climate action and the transition will impact jobs and skills in Canada. A lot of these jobs and skills requirements will actually be regional in nature. Hence, we took a place-based approach to understanding the skills needs so that we can come up with fit-for-purpose solutions that are actually helpful or meaningful within that context. We studied 3 different clusters which are important for the economy. So we looked at zero emissions vehicles in Ontario, which is intricately linked to transportation. We looked at plant-based proteins in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, which is linked to our food systems, and mass timber in British Columbia, which is linked to housing and construction. And for each of these clusters, we actually mapped the entire value chain and looked at the current and future skills needs for every occupation. Before I end this intervention, I'd like to quickly share 2 insights. One that Alex alluded to, which is that when it comes to green skills, many skills are actually not new, but there is this opportunity for us to actually recycle existing skills and apply them to net zero jobs. And for that, many professions might require upskilling or reskilling. And the good news is that this can be achieved in a reasonable amount of time. The second is that as we think about skills, we actually need to build an entire ecosystem where policymakers, educational institutions, employers, unions, as well as learners all need to come together and need to act simultaneously to tackle challenges, whether it is in relation to labor shortages or training and upskilling needs. With that, I'll end my intervention for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we're going to Samantha next.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you today from Halifax, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I work as the science lead for the Fisheries and Seafood Initiative at Oceanwise. And we are a conservation organization that works primarily in Canada, but also globally to achieve different conservation targets to make a positive impact on our ocean's resources. So my job for fisheries and seafood is to tackle the issue of overfishing. And what we do as a program is help to identify fisheries or aquaculture producers that are doing things in a sustainable way and help connect them across the sustainable seafood marketplace with big grocery store chains or restaurants or suppliers that want to have a green impact. And our project that was generously supported by the Future Skills Center was a Feed the North project. This was the fisheries for environmental and economic development in the North. And this project was sparked out of the understanding that typically our assessments for sustainability are based on Western science data and things that have robust stock assessments, typically from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. But there was a large gap in our understanding of the sustainability of small-scale fisheries, and particularly small-scale Inuit fisheries in the North. So we partnered and collaborated with a group called Ikarvik, and they are a nonprofit Inuit-led organization that works with Inuit youth to bridge that gap between organizations' understanding of Western science perspectives and also Inuit traditional knowledge and value systems. And so what we were able to do with this collaboration is to identify areas that we could either offer some insight and guidance to folks that are involved in the Ikarvik Youth Program. And for context, youth is anywhere from 16 to 30 years old. So that really is your early career position. I would still be considered in one of these youth roles. So it would be anywhere, the folks that we were working with were usually 18 to 26 years old, really at the beginning of their transition, perhaps from being a student or something into more of a role that requires some more strategic skill-based development. And so with fisheries in the North, what we were considering is, what do we need to know as an organization that can support fisheries transition into the sustainable marketplace? And how can we be guided by Inuit values or incorporate Inuit knowledge into our assessments, where there is typically a lack of acknowledgement for the sustainable practices in these communities, but only because it's someone like me from my desktop in Halifax that's researching these things. And how, in fact, can we incorporate the skills and the knowledge of these folks that are in the North through the development of their fisheries? So this was really the beginning of our project, and I'm speaking on the ocean-wise side of things. Unfortunately, my colleagues at Ikarvik are in much higher demand than I am, and they couldn't join us. So I'm speaking truly on the learnings that I had and our organization had, and I guess we could say that some of the successes is that we've really transitioned our policies, even as an ocean-wise organization, to how we engage with Inuit communities. And it was a real learning experience for myself and our colleagues. And it's really shaped the way that we would evaluate fisheries or learn from these communities. And so I'm excited to chat through some of our other learnings and processes as we continue today. Thanks.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm going to pass it to Oliver and Camelia now. You're on mute, Oliver.
Yes, excuse me. Thank you very much. And I would like to pass it on to Camelia right away, because she's one of our Inuvialuit partners from the Inuvik area in Inuvialuit settlement region. And I consider myself a visitor from the south on her backyard pretty much. So I think it's appropriate that she starts introducing her environment and herself, of course.
Thank you, Oliver. Good afternoon. My name's Camelia Gray, and I am an Inuvialuit, and I live in the community of Nunavut, Northwest Territories. And I've worked seasonally with the Trail Valley Research Site, along with Oliver's or University of Montreal, Wilfrid Laurier's university, or researchers, along with other different researchers that do come up to our area. Now, Inuvik is in the Western Arctic, and we have this ongoing concern about our natural environment and our resources. In the past, let's say the mid-70s, late 1970s, there was a huge oil and gas boom here in the Mackenzie, the Beaufort Delta. And back then, there wasn't as much concern about the environment or the natural resources that are in the Western Arctic. During that time, there was a committee for Original Peoples Entitlement that began their concern in regards to the Inuvialuit land. They developed an agreement. This became the Inuvialuit Final Agreement, and it was signed in June 1984. The basic goals of the IFA, the Inuvialuit Final Agreements, were to, and are continue to be, preserving Inuvialuit cultural identity and values within a changing Northern society, enabling Inuvialuit to be equal and meaningful participants in the Northern and national economy and society. The IFA's economic principles are expressed by the need for full Inuvialuit participation in Northern Canadian economy through the development of an adequate level of economic self-reliance and a solid economic basis. It's also to protect and preserve the Arctic wildlife environment and biological productivity. Now, if you look at the IFA and all of the bylaws and concerns that we have, it's all labeled in this agreement. And with this agreement, both the territorial and federal governments have come up with so many different laws or else forms, or making sure that our environment during any kind of studies, whether it be applications for researching the area along the Inuviatuk Highway, or whether it be out on the ocean where the oil and gas want to do more exploring. There are certain rights that have to be followed, and these became more genuine, I guess, with both territorial, federal, and the Inuvialuit working together to come into agreement, making sure that our rights are followed. And it's always better to understand what's going on with both, or with all governments, not only federal, territorial, but also in Indigenous. With so many different universities or programs, projects focusing on the climate change, global warming, erosion, permafrost concerns, especially over these past few decades, the Western Arctic people have become more aware of our area and the region, the environmental, the natural resources changing. And with the traditional and scientific knowledge that is shared with both the researchers, the scientists, the elders, the concerned community people, we have become such a better working team together when we focus on a passion that we all share, and that's the natural and the natural environment that we live in. As an individual, these past few years, I've gained more skills, more on the land training, doing more field trips, providing more assistance to some of the researchers. And I'm very grateful that I have met Oliver Sonnentag and began working with the Trail Valley crew, along with other researchers and scientists who do go to the Trail Valley research site. It's always such a, I'm always so fortunate to say that with this information that I have in our area, as well as the people I love to meet and greet, it's always so nice to be able to have open communication. And with our up-to-date technology these days, not only with droning, but with, for instance, this webinar, for constant networking, for keeping concerns about our environmental conditions with others, it's always great to be able to share this kind of information. And I'm very fortunate to have been asked to take part with Future Skills along with the University of Montreal, Oliver Sonnentag. Thank you very much. And there's some slides there that shows a little bit of our area. And looking forward to keeping in contact with as many people as I can. And I'm sure we will provide more information when and if asked. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I'm Oliver Sonnentag. I'm an associate professor agrégé at the University in the Département de Géographie at Université de Montréal. The main focus of my work is looking at how climate change affects the natural environment, permafrost, the thaw of permafrost, and how it affects overall how the rapidly changing Arctic boreal region of Western Canada interacts with the atmosphere. To do this, I established a transect of several research sites along a 2,000-kilometer gradient or transect from the central portion of Saskatchewan all the way to the Arctic Ocean, the Inuvialuit settlement region. And it was really the COVID that changed the COVID pandemic and the associated closure of the border that made me rethink how I approach my work. So we traveled all the way from Montreal to different parts of the Northwest Territories and to do basic maintenance and learn about the changing environment using a lot of heavy infrastructure, establishing towers and research sites and camps and everything. And we travel across the country several times per year to do our science, and then we leave. But at the same time, we have a lot of people living at the forefront of climate change in the area that's affected the most. And it was the Future Skills Center opportunity that made me rethink how we do science in the North. There's no need for us to travel across the country if we have locals living in the North and being actively involved. And it was through the Future Skills Center that I reached out to different contacts we had, but more as us scientists from the South going north and hiring local community members to do physical labor or labor-intensive jobs. But no, there's actually so much we can learn through these different knowledge systems, how we actually approach our science and walk this path together. And that's what led me to, I proposed a series of skill development workshops in the Northwest Territories, including the Inuvialuit settlement regions, but also other parts of the NWT, the Northwest Territories, like in the Decho, in the Satu. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but these are other regions in the western portions of the territory. And then the big question, of course, what's next? How do we continue based on what we learned through Future Skills? And I guess we'll talk more about this as part of this webinar. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to have a couple of kind of prepared questions that I'm going to put, and I'll give you an order to answer them, but I'm looking for answers from everybody on these questions. The first question, Camelia started off, gave us a little snapshot of it, but I was wondering if you could tell us all a little bit more about the local communities that you engaged in the work that you did. So how did you work with them? Any specific examples of how that community input shaped, the engagement strategies or the implementation or the actual outcomes or impact of the projects? Hem, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So when it came to community engagement, we connected with a lot of local partner organizations who in turn helped us to connect with the communities across the different clusters that we worked on. So some of the communities included, say, for example, for plant-based proteins, it was people from Indigenous works who helped us bring that perspective to the discussion. Farmers, small and medium enterprises who had just entered the space, or for zero emissions vehicles, it was people who are in the workforce, some of them on the verge of retirement, others were youth who had just entered into this space and were looking forward to their entire careers. For the mass timber, we spoke to people in small towns who, from the forestry community, who are experiencing a sort of economic downturn and are looking at new opportunities to create jobs and help their communities grow. A lot of the conversations that we had actually helped in the framing of the context and the design of the questions as we thought about either interviews or surveys, and also the design of our workshop. So, for example, what we heard from many communities or stakeholders was there was some kind of fatigue that was setting in only discussing the challenges. So having taken that kind of input a lot of the workshops that we thought about were, structured to actually focus on the solutions and the solutions that the communities thought would be in their sort of best interests. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to go to Samantha next.
Yeah, I think our project was exclusively community driven, and that was sort of the goal. And we worked with communities in Johaven and in Pond Inlet in Nunavut, and really having this existing relationship with the Iqaluit folks helped to engage the youth that we ended up hosting in various workshops in the north. And what we heard and what we learned is that, you can't really drive forward a relationship with folks unless you get to know them. So every time we went to the north to start a workshop, the first day of workshop was sort of left open to explore the community or get to know each other. So for the first time that we went to Johaven, we ended up going and just sharing food around a fire and getting to know each other. And that really helped us, hash out a few of the awkward questions or getting to know you things in a setting that was very familiar to the communities, rather than bringing everyone into a boardroom where maybe we would be more comfortable as Southern researchers, but maybe the communities that we're working with might not be willing and opening up to share in that environment right off the bat. And what we learned through some of these sort of like softer engagement sessions where they're not structured, they're really open-ended, was things that completely shifted the way we addressed the next day of workshops. So for example, we learned that in Inuktitut, there wasn't necessarily a language that described what we were talking about in sustainability, and that we had to actually meet with the community to understand what sustainability meant in their language versus what we'd been, preaching in sustainability and what our goals were. So that really shaped how we even spoke about the topics that we were talking with community members about. So these are some specific examples, but it really is the communities, like it's on them that we were even able to get anywhere in our project. So yeah, I hope it was fully community driven at the end of the day.
Oliver? Or Camelia?
Yeah. Do you want to start, Camelia? Or
Okay, sure. Being born in the community of Tuktoyaktuk and spending the first few years of my life there, and I have a lot of family members there. I have lived in the community of Nunavut ever since. Mind you, going south to school, I've always come back to Nunavut, and I've always been the type of person to meet and greet, and I've done several different kinds of marketing and or management positions here in Nunavut, so I know a lot of people, not only in Nunavut, but in the community of Tuk. These past few years, I've been able to continue to do some community visits. I love attending community meetings or else workshops. Whenever there's any researchers or visitors that come to our area, I always encourage either come with me to this office. Like, I love people meeting and greeting others because community people are always such welcoming and knowledgeable people. And the more you meet and greet, the better you're aware of the community you're in. I've always been encouraged to, as well, is be a part of the team. And being a part of the team has given me a lot of skills skills and knowledge that I don't often recognize in myself, but those are different things that I can continue to do. And with meeting and greeting and with going to meetings or workshops, how we could all continue to be able to network all the time. And, it's never too hard to be as open as you can when asked questions. And if you're passionate about what you do, then better understanding with the community people. And I know, I believe it's Samantha in Halifax, you know, like we talk about Joe Haven and, or maybe was it Pond Inlet, and how you had like attended or you've started maybe the function of a campfire, or, you know, doing things with and around the community people. That's what really helps different organizations, or else different research groups, or any visitors to attend any of the community meetings, meet the community people. So, you know, it's with constant networking that I just love. It's what I am encouraged, and that's what I do. So, I mean, a lot of the community people like to meet and greet too, so never be afraid.
Yeah, I can only echo what Camelia just said and Samantha before. It's time in the community. Through this Future Skills project, I realized there's no point in just going through a community from the south to the site, do your work and leave, but no spending time in the community, going to community meetings, reaching out to people, showing presence, maybe putting together small presentations, hosting a little event in the band office, communicating signs, reaching out, inviting people to come and join the field party and help in the field, and just engaging. And this can only be done through physical presence. Of course, now we're meeting here on Zoom, and as part of the pandemic, we had to do this. But I mean, now, you know, I realize getting things started and off the ground and building trust and relationship requires presence in the community. And you know, the learning really went both ways. I mean, the goal was to develop skills, but I feel fortunate enough that with my team, we had enough opportunity to spend time in the community and learn ourselves from community members. So it's really going both ways, and I'm really very thankful for that. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. The next kind of leads well into my next question about, you know, just thinking about the role that Alex highlighted in terms of the role of technical skills and non-technical skills for the people, the sectors that these projects took place in. And just wondering if you could comment on how those played out or were a factor in the projects that you worked on. Another kind of slice of this is to talk about, you know, the other duality of Western science and how that was married with Indigenous knowledge and how those complemented each other in the work that you did. I'm going to start with Samantha on this one.
Yeah, great, thanks. And I think this was really the bulk of our project, was understanding what some of the similarities and differences were between our approach as a conservation organization and what was already happening in some of the fisheries development in these communities. So for a little bit more context, both Joe Haven and Pond Inlet have put forth a request to have their fisheries. And of course, they have like subsistence fisheries, but in terms of commercial fisheries, they're still in the development phase. So part of what we were working on is understanding how we could prepare these fisheries to have a seat at the table when we talk about sustainable fisheries in the South. And really that involved more learning, I think, on our end of how we can bring some of the knowledge that these fisheries have, where they're already operating perhaps in a way that is sustainable, but they just don't have necessarily all of the technical skills or requirements to gather the data around being able to validate whether it's sustainable, and what the trade-off is between how much data is required for someone like us in the South to hold up a fishery from the North against like a small scale fishery in the North against like perhaps a huge industrial trawler in the South Pacific. So we're trying to find the trade-off between that. And it was really shaped by what we learned from the community, and that it's kind of has to be tailored to each community that you speak to and each fishery that you talk to. There can't be a one size fits all solution. Of course, that's the more difficult answer. We can't compare apples to oranges in this case, but how can we go about the engagement process that gets us a good roadmap towards equitable evaluation of these fisheries rather than equal? And so I don't know if that totally answers your question, but we're still working on kind of the way to look at the actual integration of the Western science and the Inuit knowledge, but I think we're getting there, and that's really where we ended up at this the close of this project was a way forward. So and hopefully some development of skills for these youth that are involved in maybe advocating for better fisheries management, and equipping them with some of the knowledge that we have when they have a seat at the table with perhaps decision makers from the government while their fisheries are being developed.
Okay, gonna go to Oliver and Camelia next.
Yeah, maybe I can start now this round. So for us, I mean, most of our work is highly technical. It requires micrometeorological instrumentation, solar power. How do you power this power-hungry equipment off the grid somewhere on the field, etc. But over time, we realized, so we went up north, installed our equipment. We do our science driven by scientific literature, the Western scientific literature. But what has fundamentally changed through the work with the Future Skills Project and folks like Camelia and others in other parts of Northwest Territories was really that the traditional knowledge guided the Western science, right? How we approach our science and the questions we ask, what makes actual sense, or what is useful for communities to adapt and mitigate, or adapt to climate change, but also mitigate. And so that was, like I mentioned earlier, definitely a both-way learning situation.
Amelia, anything to add to Oliver's comment?
Yes, like you say, you asked about technical and non-technical skills and mentioned also, Oliver, like traditional and scientific knowledge. With so many different opportunities in our scientific atmosphere these days, like for instance, I'm just going to say Starlink for one, or Wi-Fi. Like here in the community of Nunavut, well, I shouldn't say only in the Nunavut, but actually the Western Arctic, there's been more opportunities for community people, community individuals, gaining more access to Wi-Fi. And it's amazing, like when you do different presentations in the different communities, especially attending the schools, you can see how knowledgeable the 7 or 8-year-old is, you know, and wanting to learn more about drones, building their own drones. It's amazing what so few people know about the Western Arctic. And the more knowledge you learn about this geographical area and how far apart we all are, it's amazing with Western societies. Oh, how can I put it? Computer industry, I guess. It's so many more elders, I'm going to say over 65, are learning more about their computers and what benefits they can get from computer use, or Starlink, cell phones. It amazes me. And you know, with the traditional and scientific knowledge, they go hand in hand. You know, it's this for me, I'm just going to say on a personal note, when I went to a presentation last year during one of the times when the Aurora Research Institute had one of the presenters from the Herschel Island area doing an update on their research project, they were talking about shrubs. And me as an individual, I'm used to calling them, oh, the bush, you know, or I'm not going to say forest. I'm going to go, oh, out on the land, or, you know. And then I asked this researcher, I said, well, what's a shrub? Not knowing, not thinking, you know. And they showed me, and I'm going, oh, I felt, you know, like, I'm not going to say humiliated, but I felt like, I should have known better. I should have known more information on the actual scientific word that you use. But there's different areas where it's always so interesting to attend community meetings and better understanding of what's going on with these different projects that are taking place right across Canada. But anyways, with traditional and scientific knowledge, along with technical and non-technical skills, we're all learning and very thankful for continued updates with what we can and will be doing in the future.
Thank you, Camelia. Hem, anything to add to the technical, non-technical skills?
So in terms of the technical skills, as we were actually doing the work, we did expect to see some changes. So for example, someone working in the automotive industry, building or assembling a gasoline engine, now has to start assembling a battery. And so you need more chemical or mechanical expertise in those kinds of professions. We also found that across all the three clusters, non-technical skills like critical thinking, decision-making, judgment seem to be extremely important. And Alex also alluded to this a little earlier. But what was most interesting is the complementarity of both of these, the technical and the non-technical skills, to actually deliver on a project. To give an example, in the mass timber industry, the beams and panels of the entire building are produced in a factory. Then they are taken to the site and assembled like a Lego structure. So that's how this works. So for an architect, they need to be able to actually coordinate with the person in the factory who's making those beams and columns. They need to actually speak the same language. They need to be able to problem solve together while bringing their individual technical skills that they need to do their specific role, whether it's in the design or the manufacturing of those panels. So this was something that emerged not just for mass timber, but there are examples across different clusters as well, which to us was very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Hem. The next question, and I'm going to go to Oliver and Camelia first on this one, is what were the primary challenges that you faced while you were implementing this project, and how did you address them?
Where to start, right? I mean, I had this great idea. Let's go north, train people, and everything is great. But then it was different, right? I mean, I've been going back and forth at the Northwest Territories, Yellowknife in different parts for a decade, when I realized, let's train people. But, just me showing up with my, Western science thinking, a 2-year project won't turn the population of the Northwest Territories into trained instrumentation engineers. So where do we start? And, I had to scale back a lot, right? I mean, it was a bit of a reality check. The technical skills available, and then I had to also change. Then, so over the course of the project, I had to change. What do I expect from the future skills project itself, and what's going to be the measurable output? I can't hand out certificates, right, for a certain skill sets. I can't really help, and it all comes down. Okay, the technical part worked out a little bit differently than envisioned originally. But as a non-measurable output or a result of the project were the trust and relationships built with community members and how they advance to the next steps, right? I mean, I cannot provide, or I wasn't able to provide permanent employment to several community members, but I was able with people like Camelia and a few others in other parts of the Northwest Territories to engage them and learn from them, but also make sure, provide them with avenues to share their own knowledge further south. For example, it's a rather non-technical outcome, I guess, of future skills. But I mean, I'm on the scientific advisory board for a new exhibition on the Canadian North in the Montreal Science Museum. So I asked or invited Camelia to join the scientific advisory board to provide a firsthand perspective on, the climate change impacts in the North and these types of avenues. So I think it was over the course of the project, we changed and adapted the perspectives a little bit.
Camelia, anything you want to add to the challenges?
Yes, the weather.
Good point.
The geographical location that we're in. There are only 2 main airlines that come into the community of Nunavut. And if you look at the western or the Inuvialuit settlement region area, you'll notice the communities, how far away they are from one another. And Nunavut, I'll just say, is sort of the main hub of this area. And we have two different airlines that fly in from the south, and the cost is immense. It's very expensive. With the delivery or with cargo coming in, that could be quite a big cost for the different researchers and the material that they want to be sent in and or sent out. It's always been a big concern, not only with the food costs up here, but getting any of the material or the cargo that you want brought up or sent out, it's costly. There's not, well, in terms of weather, like the flying, there's like helicopters, there's different like 185 Cessnas, you know, or the Twin Otters. You have to consider with the change in weather, like this time of the year now, it's autumn, the colors, the yellows, it's all coming out now, but there's the fogs in the spring. There's as well as this time of the year. There's the hot conditions in the summer, 24-hour sunlight. Blizzard conditions in the winter. We had a huge amount of snowfall last winter, and it done a lot of waiting for the Nunavut Highway to be open because of the blizzard conditions or the snowfall. There's so many different challenges that we have to face, and we always have to like have a plan B and be comfortable with the plan C, because plan A and plan B won't work. So you'll have to be comfortable with plan C and just wait it out, like waiting for the weather to change, or else waiting for that certain piece of equipment that you need to finish this project off. But anyways, it's all like the geographical area, the weather changes, and the cost, it's immense. Anyways, hey, just thought I'd share that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Hem next.
So in terms of challenges, something that Oliver alluded to was is a similar challenge we faced, which was building trust with the different communities that we worked in, whether it was in Windsor or in London, Ontario, or whether in the rural areas in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, or northern British Columbia, where we did some of our work. And something, you know, that we were extremely mindful of is that we did not want to go in or create the perception that we're this university based in Ottawa who's coming to you and telling you what to do. So, you know, I think that's very important that we were respectful, we listen more, and let the community help us understand the challenges and for them to come up with the solutions that work for them. So I think this was something that we were very mindful of throughout the project, the relationship building part. The second challenge was, you know, with respect to data, which has come up several times in this conversation. Sometimes it's hard to get granular data, especially when you move away from the national level to the provinces, municipalities, or even smaller communities. So I think that's something that is to be thought about, and to see how we can improve those systems so that we have useful information to help decision makers at all of those levels come up with helpful, meaningful decisions. Thank you.
Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, I echo also what Oliver and Camelia said about the remote aspect of some of our workshop locations. Weather was certainly a factor, as well as the nature of the pandemic as well was kind of when we started our project. So that certainly delayed our ability to start our in-person workshops. And we once scheduled a workshop that was the same time as a volleyball tournament in one of these communities, which we were promptly told that that will take precedent over anything that we are doing. So maybe you should adjust your schedule, which is exactly what we needed to hear, right? But I also echo some of the challenges that come out of understanding what the final impact was for a program like ours and what we were working with, where a lot of these skills are kind of, you're not going to know whether or not the folks develop these skills until they're put in a position to use them, right? So particularly like advocating against, or not against, but for their self-determination when it comes to fisheries management. And also unique to our situation was one of the challenges was trying to get communities and particularly the youth we were working with to understand the nature of the seafood market in the rest of Canada, and understanding that like when you're commercially selling some of these goods, perhaps if your fishery is to develop and you're going to be involved, like some of the things that we heard were, well, why would I ever harvest more than I need, you know, or why would I ever like take extra fish? Like what is overfishing even? What does that mean? Because it's just not something that these folks who haven't been commercially fishing for so long were aware of, or they're not like used to understanding the context of overconsumption like we see in other fisheries. And then also imposing the idea that, you know, there's a moratorium currently on Arctic fishing between the countries around the Arctic Ocean, but that's going to be lifted in 2037. So we're quickly approaching the next few decades where fishing is going to be booming in their region, and establishing, you know, kind of understanding that, okay, you might not think of overfishing in your own community, but some of these folks that are going to potentially be operating in your ocean space might not think the same way as you. So that was a challenge of balancing, you know, what we know to be true in other geographies with what these communities know and how they practice in their own fisheries. So that took a lot longer, I think, than we had anticipated. Rather than just doing a presentation, there was a lot of like going to the grocery store, identifying different products that we don't recommend for one reason or another. So that was certainly one of the challenges that we faced early on.
I can see that we're getting, this has been a really rich conversation. We're getting to the end of our time together. So I'm going to kind of lump the last two questions together. And I think it's a good segue, Samantha, that you provided us, was to understand, like, how did you understand the impact of the work that you did, given the challenges that you've surfaced, and thinking about, you know, policy-wise, what's a change that you'd like to see to better support the communities that you were carrying out the projects with? And I think I will go back to Hem first.
So in terms of the policy change that we'd like to see, what we've realized from this work is that when it comes to skills training, whether it's technical or non-technical skills, colleges and post-secondary institutions, which are community-facing, are actually best positioned to offer these reskilling and upskilling programs to different individuals. And so one policy change would be to help support them more. And this could be through funding to either float new courses or to change their curriculums, or as scholarships to students who want to get into these different areas of clean growth opportunities. Something else, a second recommendation, if I may, would be thinking about the broader ecosystem. A lot of opportunities that are actually going to come up are likely to be in rural areas. So thinking about housing affordability, thinking about, you know, childcare, transportation, how do people get to work? All of these are going to be extremely important, so that if the jobs are created there, people would actually want to go and work there. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Samantha next and end with Oliver and Camelia. And Camelia, I think you had some photos that you wanted to share as well. So just to maybe get those ready after Samantha's done her response.
Yeah, so one of the things that we heard loud and clear from some of the folks that we engaged throughout this project from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is they said to us, well, do you have a framework that we can use to identify how we would like work with fisheries in the north as sort of the Arctic Ocean starts to become more accessible and they start to develop their management planning. And they were like, we'd love to have your framework that you developed from this project. And we said, well, hold on, you can't necessarily work that way. And everyone that you're engaging with has to be sort of consulted in part of this. So I think what we learned and what we took away in terms of our own organizational policy was this roadmap towards engagement, and how can you make sure that everyone at the table is consulted or has a voice in this matter. And that's kind of what we were hoping to impose on some of the youth that we were working with as well, is that, you know, the opportunities are going to continue to show up in fisheries and oceans management. So hopefully we can help shape the policy moving forward with the input of these folks in these communities. So I don't know what specifically I would like to see changed, rather than the hope that other organizations like us at OceanWise and others that work in the South that we collaborate with, who we've kind of pulled into this partnership or have worked to explain what we've done with this work, is they build their own policies around how to engage meaningfully with these communities, rather than a checkbox, but more embedding some of the knowledge and learnings that we've had through this project into their daily work, rather than making it an afterthought or something like that. And so how did we manage the impact or identifying the impact? Is that at the end of our project, we had a workshop where instead of us just going to the north, we actually held it in Vancouver and welcomed some of the folks from different communities that we'd be working with to stay with us in Vancouver. And then we invited other stakeholders through business partners that we have that are like restaurant suppliers and things. And then some First Nations folks from Vancouver Island to come and explain like the work that we had been doing, and allow these youth to kind of share their stories and what they had learned throughout the course of the few years that we had been working with them on the project. And that was sort of our way of gauging where we're at, what the overall learnings were from the project for the youth that will then go back to their communities and perhaps have a chance to be involved in the development of their fisheries, and then also have a chance to share and storytell with everyone else in the South, who hopefully will then be able to maybe access some of their resources, or even just learn, you know, the process of engagement that we went through with eCarvic and with all the youth involved. So that was really the impact for me, is to see that some of these youth were able to communicate more of these like difficult topics of conversation that we'd been having in a way that makes sense for them and makes sense to other stakeholders. So that was really the cherry on top of what we'd been doing, and we still have quite a ways to go, but it was very encouraging that was how we wrapped things up.
And the last word to Oliver and Camelia.
Okay. So yeah, overall, I think we all learned a lot from our Future Skills project. I wouldn't call it a formal framework, but I think we have many ideas for the next steps and how to move forward. The thing is, as an individual university professor, it is very hard to implement any changes. Right? I mean, I can apply for individual project funding, a project starts, a project ends, but the institutional limits on continuing this work, I mean, in terms of policy changes, there are many institutional changes required. I mean, to run such a project in the North, there's a disconnect between Northern realities and a unionized environment in the South, just how we distribute the money, how we access the money, all the forms and systems we have to work with in our big institution, they're not ready for the North, right? I mean, there were so many, you know, we had to come up with so many creative solutions. Just how do we access money and how do we distribute money? I mean, a lot of the funding was routed through my personal account because there was no mechanism in place to access and work with community members. That's not a long-term solution. There has to be an institution behind all these processes and implementing sustainable long-term programs and community engagement. So I think it was a great first step. But the big question remains, what's next? And I haven't found an answer yet.
Amelia, anything to add?
I just want to add on, you know, with they, you know, talk about what to include or what changes to make and skills training. And I just really want to encourage all that if you know of any funding sources available for any kind of programs, share it. And especially if you're going to a community, share the information with the others so the community is aware of what they can do for any of their youth training, especially youth training, because there's a lot of focus, there's funds already out there, and just pass on any sources of or information that you can pass on to the community to help in skills training and like on the job training or hands-on learning experiences. Keep it up. Any new courses, any different areas that you're working in, continue to pass on different information that you can to help provide as much support to the area or the research project you're working on in any of the communities in Canada. Thanks.
It's my pleasure to say thank you so much to this wonderful panel today. I'm going to encourage each of you just to take a quick look at the Q&A. There might be some questions there directed at you. But thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it back to Ghazala.
Thank you, everyone. I want to close with thanking this very community present here today, from our communications and interpretation team to our speakers, panelists, and most importantly, to all of you in attendance who have taken the time to establish the importance of our collective work that now transcends through your professional and personal path in forging a sustainable future. We truly want to know what you thought about today's session and ask for just one more moment to complete the survey that will pop up right at the end of our webinar. On behalf of the Future Skills Center, we hope to meet again in our peer learning group. As consistently highlighted by Camelia, Hem, Oliver, and Samantha, FSC also believes wholeheartedly in the power of community, and we look forward to strengthening ours by bringing us together again tomorrow. Until then, take good care.